Welcome to Mating Matters, the podcast that looks at all human behavior through a lens of evolutionary psychology, and specifically, human mating behavior. My guest is Lauren Southern. You may have seen her documentary. It's on YouTube and a few other places on the internet. She's a Canadian journalist, an author, and a documentary filmmaker. She's very well known for her films Farmlands, Borderless, and more recently, Crossfire. But it is empty love that caught my interest. It's a thought-provoking exploration of modern romance in the digital age. And in it, Lauren Southern delves into the complexities of finding a genuine connection in a sea of mistrust and all kinds of society's pressures. Welcome, Lauren Southern. Thanks for being with me on Mating Matters.
Thank you for having me.
So my first question is always around the why. And I know that your documentaries are very varied, but personally, what were you going through in your personal life, and how old were you when you started to come to the idea that, Houston, we have a problem with love?
Well, I tend to choose my documentary subjects based on problems I'm seeing in the real world. And one thing I notice more and more in the political realm is a lot of projection. You know, it's the problem is all men, the problem is all women. And this rise of very quick 1-minute clips going viral on TikTok from podcasts like Whatever or Fresh and Fit, where you can feel so much animosity towards the other sex. And they're going viral for a reason.
And
they're going viral because people are feeling very...
And at the time in your life, were you young and dating and looking at media and saying, should this be my model? What was going on in your life?
Well, in my life in the last 5 years, I'm actually separated from my husband, and I've certainly had my throes in the dating world, but I'm almost opted out for a bit right now myself as it's so chaotic. But I have a particularly unique situation. I have been a political activist, certainly when I was younger, and my husband worked for the federal government, and that caused, issues with security clearances. I've been banned from countries. So that would be quite I don't know if my situation directly maps on to the average person's situation, but it's certainly something that we can get into if you'd like.
That sounds like a major conflict.
Yes, it certainly does. But it certainly in my own real life experiences with dating and romance and marriage, I do not see much content from the mainstream media or alternative media that really reflects the actual nuance of relationships. You'll see these listicles come out on websites. If you just do these 5 things, that's how men will like you. That's how you'll be the perfect traditional wife. If you do these 5 things, women will love you. And then none of this actually maps onto reality. People get into relationships, and they're far more complicated. No listicle solves it, and they get bitter, they get angry, and they think, and I certainly thought this in my own life, I followed the listicle perfectly. I woke up in the morning, I cooked the breakfast, I cooked the dinner, I wore the sundress. Why is my relationship not working? I was faithful, I deleted all, but that's not how real life works. That's not how real life works. And the modern world is such a new beast. It's such a behemoth of problems we never had before when it comes to the dating apps, the paralysis of choice, the what should my life look like? I want it to look like the Instagram model who is on the private jet, whose husband is buying her the new, fancy jewelry that costs $10,000 every day. That should be me there. But that's not real life. That's not where you find actual love.
In fact, in a few minutes, I'm definitely going to ask you more detail about what's going on digitally and with our media. But you just hit on something that intrigued me. When you described your idea of doing the list to be the perfect traditional wife, and then things weren't working out like your fantasy, I'm wondering if there is a younger generation who are both confused about gender roles, want more female freedom, but then are told, well, if you don't act more traditional in your gender roles, then men won't like you. Do you think there's a double message going to women, like work hard, get your education, make money, but in your private life, in your personal relationships, try to be as traditional as possible? Is that double message happening to young women?
Wendy, this is the main problem I'm hearing from every girlfriend I have. They are feeling torn between 2 worlds. And we have to remember, things like having a credit card, getting a mortgage. Women only were able to partake in these things in the 70s. So this is very new. This is very new, and we still have an older generation giving influence to young people and young men and what ideas of relationships are. They're modeling it off of their mothers, their fathers. So I'm seeing these girls that have been encouraged by the school system, and it doesn't matter for better or for worse, right? That's an entirely different debate, to go become lawyers, to go become doctors. And they do this. And then in their personal life, their personal relationship, their partners are wondering, why do you never take care of me? Why aren't you cooking me dinner? Why aren't you doing my laundry? And they're thinking in their head, I'm off at the law office. I'm in the middle of my, dissertation. What are you talking about? I'm contributing as much money to the household as you are. But then the way in which men, certainly growing up, have had love and relationships modeled to them by their parents is, but my mom always did the laundry for my dad. My mom always cooked dinner every night. Why aren't you being feminine? Why aren't you being the submissive woman? Like, do you not love me? Do you not see me as a masculine leader of the household? So it's this fundamental clash of worlds that we have never had before in human history.
And I
never
will
have
say,
women been this employed and this educated.
As you mentioned, the change goes on both sides. While there are many men who are absolutely intimidated by a strong, independent, economically secure woman, at the same time, there's research, a great sociologist out of Scotland came up with something in her study that she called the George Clooney effect. And she found that the more education a woman got and the more money she made, the more she expected her partner to make even more money and be even more successful. And so, of course, that's a shrinking population of men, and you get a lot of women competing for those men. And so just as you could say that many men may be intimidated by a strong woman, there are many women who don't want to, in their minds, I'm making quotation marks with my fingers now, date down. This idea that if a man is taking care of children and helping out at home, he's less masculine or less strong in some way. So I think this is in the heads of all genders when we talk about this, that yes, these traditional gender roles were defined on very clear lines not so long ago. And now there's absolute confusion about who's supposed to do what. Is this what you're experiencing?
Absolutely. And I think even at the end of the day, most women want to be taken care of. Even the women that, I'm not saying there aren't a lot of women that want to go out and be go-getters, and they are doing amazing stuff, right? But a lot of women at the end of the day, it's like, okay, at some point, maybe I want to have kids. Maybe I want to, relax a little bit and not be in the work grind. And they want to find a man that can take care of them. But when you're doing such a good job taking care of yourself, it's really hard to find a man that is now competing with a whole swath of the population that weren't competing in the workforce before, that is going to be making more than you, that's going to be more productive than you, more involved in or educated than you. More women are in universities today, I believe, than men.
Oh, yes.
So that is causing massive issues.
So I often say to women that your idea of a power man may just be a man who can power a stroller, and that we have to understand that men are human beings and that there will be a man out there to complement. I'm happy to see in media, starting to see portrayals of strong working women and men who are supporting them. I'm watching a series on Netflix right now where there's a stay-at-home dad and she's off, finding a serial killer around the world. And so we're starting to see media give us a wider range of depictions of gender roles. And I also believe that if we can just be authentic and know who we are and what we want, separate from our family of origin or what the media tells us we should be, but we should figure out what works for us. And when you mentioned all women fantasize about being taken care of, I don't think all women do, but I think that women are worried about the years, the non-earning years, when they will, women have babies. Sorry, men don't have babies. And during those, I was a single mom. I breastfed each of my kids for 3 years. And I'm telling you, those were the 6 hardest years of my life, trying to make money to keep a roof over everybody's head while I was making breast milk. So I know this search for a partner. I understand this idea that you want him to be attached to a paycheck. But there are other ways. I think couples really early on need to talk about gender roles from the beginning, even on a first date. Like, what was your gender roles like at your family growing up? And what do you envision in the future? And it just opens the conversation. But it is it is a big problem for all genders, for sure. And then you add on dating apps and Instagram.
Yes.
I mean, these couples that act like have the most perfect life. I'm just like, whoa, on Instagram. We know that's absolutely not true. There's something else I want to mention, though.
Yes, and
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No, I was going to say they never do. Like I work in the influence sphere. I work in, I have a lot of friends that, because I've been in particularly more traditional circles, it's a very important thing to portray. I have a very good traditional life. Here's the picture of the wedding. Here's the picture of me making sourdough bread. And I know too many people personally, and I have been this person myself, to even pretend for a second that there isn't far more complexity behind that. And in a lot of cases, when you have that pressure socially to portray that life, it's even worse behind the scenes, because rather than having honest conversations, like you said, of who is actually better in what position, maybe the woman should be working more, maybe the man should be pushing the stroller, whatever it is, whoever is better in what position, when it has to fit into a very strict, confined space of what the world or your community is going to see as acceptable rather than what is reality, things can get really dark that way.
On this podcast, I talk about evolutionary psychology a lot. And when I refer to the traditional family, I often call it the modern traditional family, because in our hunter-gatherer past, for sure we never had long-term monogamy. For sure we never had until death do us part. For sure we never had two humans biologically related to the offspring in their house, living in one hut forever. I mean, I often say a woman in the suburbs alone with kids is a prescription for I need a prescription. It is just a difficult thing. We are meant to be in a village. We're meant to have helpers, whether they're aunties or cousins or uncles. And I actually, more than I blame the change in gender roles, I blame modern capitalism for needing a mobile workforce and tearing people away from their villages of origin and losing the whole support structure that they had around their relationship and their marriage and their family and their kids. And it is this idea that two people alone in a tract house in the suburbs should be able to get along and have kids. And that is causing so much problems in relationships.
So true. I'm so glad you recognize that, because there's so much strange worship of the nuclear family. And don't get me wrong, the nuclear family is great, but when it's portrayed in these Norman Rockwell photos of you have the white picket fence, the mom, the dad, the two kids, and that's what it is, like you said, that is just a recipe for disaster, a recipe for, the woman getting addicted to painkillers or whatever to try to numb the day of having to just be around kids 24/7 instead of having other moms around or community kids to play with. Everyone knows this. If you have two kids, in a lot of cases, it can be easier than just one because they'll entertain each other. The more kids, the more moms carrying the workload. Oh my goodness. Lifesaver.
It's so true. And so I wanted to say something about this struggle that young people especially are trying to figure out. We also know that you can't change biology, although science is trying. Women are freezing their eggs. They're using in vitro fertilization. They're trying to extend their fertility window. And this is largely, again, because modern capitalism needs them educated and working. We have left our agrarian days. We are now into the information age. Women are more uniquely suited to talk, type, text, and have more social sensitivity, so more likely to succeed in the information age. So we are keeping women during the biggest part of their fertility window in education and career building. And so then there's this struggle where there's both a rush to find a mate in their 30s before their window closes, and then science trying to step in to help them freeze their eggs or use a surrogate or do something to make it happen, when actually we need to just support women when they're biologically ready. You mentioned a minute ago that women, that the nuclear family can be a nightmare. Sadly, for children, the nuclear family is still the best nest we have statistically until we have free childcare in every workplace for every woman. It's still kind of the best deal we have for kids. So this is the real problem, is that do we force ourselves into this, square peg in a round hole and make ourselves do this for the kids so that they'll have better outcomes? Do we try to push science and change our fertility window? What do young women do? when their fertility window begins at the age of 20, the height of it is through the 20s, and yet that's the time they're told to stay in school and start working?
I mean, they're in an extraordinarily difficult position. You have these conversations in more traditional circles online of, well, why do women have to work at all? They could just get married and have babies, and you'll be happiest that way. Well, how difficult is it to find a man who actually wants to settle down and get married at around the same age as them, or even 10 years older than them? A lot of men don't want to settle down. It takes a while of really vetting people and getting to know them before you find a husband. So do we expect women to be homeless for the first 5 years of their adult life? And then you've got this modern ideology, which is, once again, very anti-community, where you have kind of boomer parents or Gen X parents now kicking out their 19-year-old daughters. Get out of the house. You're an adult now. You know, stop being lazy and living in the basement. So it's really the pressure is on. I better go to work. And then on top of that, you have this real trade and calculation I'm seeing in the heads of young women, where they think, okay, I could marry for love or find a husband for love, or I could marry for stability, find the guy with the good job and the money. And in some ways, the marrying just for stability is the smarter decision. It's not for the soul, of course, which everyone truly should want the real thing, real love, real relationships. But if a relationship ends and you've married for love and he doesn't have money, well, you end up a single mother, and oh my goodness, the stats are not looking good for you, especially if you haven't gotten a job, especially if you haven't gotten an education. How are you supposed to support yourself? I'm sorry, but the average, child support payment is $300 in the U.S. Whenever we see it in the media, these, getting $10,000 a month or, $500,000 a month, these are usually celebrities, wealthier people. So they're in a serious predicament. But the biggest problem we have is that lack of any sort of moral accountability or tradition that we are adhering to. We, in kind of modern Marxist ideology, we have deconstructed a lot of these social barriers that we had in place that stopped people from running away, abandoning their kids, abandoning their families. We didn't have the apps. So what you need is someone who has strict social boundaries around them in the form of community, family that you know well. Oh, you better know their extended family and their direct family, the in-laws, all of that. But these are things that aren't taught to people either when we discuss modern relationships. That's not portrayed in the Disney movies. That's not even portrayed in the, you read Cosmopolitan or you watch dating shows. None of it is about, okay, did you get to know their family? Did you get to know their community, the people they work with, the type of, the stuff that makes them them? It's really this individualist idea of, well, did you click during the honeymoon phase and have an exciting date like The Notebook where you laid down in the road under the lights? And was it all very high adrenaline and serotonin when these are very fleeting things? So we really have to get away from the serotonin-based culture, in my opinion.
Exactly, the dopamine.
Have a mix of both.
You mentioned something a minute ago. You talked about there are fewer traditional barriers. In other words, there used to be guardrails that kept people in their traditional relationships. I'm going to ask you to think out of the box. Do you think it's possible that we not, quote unquote, go back to a modern nuclear family and move to something else that's equally beneficial to the soul and to children?
It's the only way.
What do you think that future looks like?
The cat is out of the bag on the internet. The cat is out of the bag on women having birth control and working. There's anyone suggesting we just go back is, quite frankly, unhinged and living in, a delusion. Mm-hmm. So the only thing we can possibly do to go forward is to have a real genuine conversation of what is it that men want? What is it that women want? What is it that my partner wants? Who am I? What am I? People aren't even asking these questions. They aren't asking what are my morals. They aren't asking what are my goals in life. They aren't looking to the future. They are asking what makes me feel good right now, because I want to distract from the pain I am suffering right now in this modern world of feeling like I have no footing, no identity. And they are trying to find their identity in a partner, in a relationship, because if you watch TVs and movies, that is the point of life. It is to find love and die together. But if you don't have any of these other things in place of who you actually are and what you actually want in life and what you are fighting for, and you don't create systems in your life to ensure you adhere to those morals, because you do have to create systems. It's not just something you think of and say, I'm going to do that. No, if you want a traditional relationship where you're going to grow old together, maybe you do need to delete the Instagram. Maybe you do need to delete all the apps on your phone that put you in contact with these people. If you want to be someone who is...
I'm hearing you say, and I asked you, if we didn't go back to the traditional relationship, what would the future look like? And you talked about a loss of intimacy, a loss of emotional connection and vulnerability. And truthfully, the research is very clear that is the glue that holds people together. But then you said, but if you do want to go back to a traditional relationship where you grow old together. So is that your idea that all relationships should strive for?
I do think all relationships should be to grow old together. I think that is what... I don't think love or commitment are things that you ever let go of. They are things you go into for life. And I'll give a personal anecdote to this. Like I have trouble ever imagining the idea of getting married again. My husband and I are separated because when I said I do at the altar, I meant that. Like I meant that with my heart and soul. And then that brings in a huge complication because, well, what does it mean when I meant that? When I said it, how do I move on? How do I say that again? And that's something that I'm struggling with. That's something that I'm working through because I don't want a shallow life relationship that seems like torture to me, to be in something where when you say I love you, it's kind of with a shrug of the shoulder, like, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. That's what I'm supposed to say.
But
and in some ways, moment, the hardcore traditionalists can do the same thing.
In that moment, when you said I do, I feel quite sure that it was not with a shrug of a shoulder. What if I told you?
No, it wasn't.
What if I told you that when Till Death Do Us Part was invented, death was pretty imminent? If you got married in the year 1900 and stood up and professed until death do you part, the average length of that marriage was about 12 years. If you got married in 1990 and did the same thing, professed until death do us part, the average length of that marriage was about 12 years. Now, in one case, you were dying because of a plague, a death, no vaccinations, war, a bad fight after a bar, whatever. In the 90s, you were ending it because of divorce. So what if I told you that because of our very long life expectancies, even the most monogamous humans, even the ones that love each other deeply, will probably have 2 or 3 long stints of monogamy in their lifetime with some mate selection in between that we call dating, because we're literally outliving our relationships and the purpose of each one. In other words, a relationship that begins when you're young, and the purpose of that relationship, because the two of you chose it, is to raise a family. The two of you may look at yourself when that last child is about to graduate high school and go, who are you? What do I want for these next few decades left for me? And realize that the purpose of the relationship has been a success and not a failure, but it's done. And so I think that people are dealing with the confusion around that very scientific reality. You're surprised by this.
That sounds so dark to me. It does. Dark. It is. I mean, you're probably correct. It sounds dark to me because, once again, I think words have as much meaning as you give them. So, and I do think that when people say, I love you, that is being used more frivolously nowadays. It's being used as, and this is where you get all these conversations from young women using the therapy language about, he gaslit me, he love bombed me, he did these guys, right? Mm-hmm. Well, he said, I love you right away, because it's being used as a manipulation tactic. And maybe you do have it on this scale where it's like, you have the I love you, which is so final that you can never move on, even if it's healthier for you, and the other person doesn't love you back anymore or something. And then you have the I love you that is being used to love bomb and manipulate, and you don't mean anything behind it. And I find maybe this is a problem with the older generations that were getting married in the 90s and whatnot. But with young people, with millennials and Gen Z, I think their problem is way more on the scale of I love you, them not even knowing what that means, or that not being tied to any sort of real, I'm going to fight for this. But I think you're probably, I mean, you do this more than me, discuss these relationships and talk with people about relationships, so you know better than I do. But for my own personal, opinion, I at least I wish for a world in which I love you meant for life. But I guess that's not necessarily human.
And I want to pull you off the guilt train because I'm hearing a lot of guilt in this. I said I do, and it's a commitment, and words have meaning. There is no way, as a human being, feeling the feelings you felt, those beautiful, wonderful feelings of love the day you said I do, there is no way you could predict human circumstances into the future. Not yours, not his, not anything that could have happened. And so I think it's a pure and beautiful and wonderful thing to say those words. And yes, I do believe that people need to do as much as they possibly can, especially if there are children in the nest, to keep it together and not throw in the towel too easily. But you have gone through it, and you know how hard it is. You know that there are things outside of you and outside of him that caused this tearing of apart. And that doesn't mean that you didn't mean I do and that you didn't feel deep love and commitment. You're still a good, perfectly imperfect person like the rest of us. There. Auntie Wendy pulled you off the guilt train.
Didn't expect my live therapy session, but thank you. Appreciate that. I would be curious, since you're asking me a lot of these things, and I'm just investigating as a dog. I'm just, showing the experts in my movie, and, I'm speaking to people who are sex workers and people who are on dating apps, and I'm curious what they had to say to me, but I don't necessarily have the solutions. What do you think the answer to the modern malaise with love is for particularly Gen Z and millennials?
Before I give you my opinion, I think it's only fair I share my history with you as well. I was raised Catholic and thought that there was only one way to do it. And so I had a big white Catholic wedding for my mother when I was 20, literally, because she said, I'll never talk to you again if you move in with your college boyfriend. And so there it was. And 3 years later, when I graduated college, I graduated from him. And the rest of my life, like you, I was afraid to say the words I do, because that was such a monumental thing to have this giant white Catholic wedding at the age of 20. And so I spent my life experiencing the same things you say are unique to young people, which are dating the playboys that were tall, dark, and handsome and had the money and that had an avoidant attachment style. And I projected my anxious attachment onto them. And I did everything I possibly could to make them love me. I gave them sex too fast, or I withheld sex, or I did all the things. I baked for them, or I didn't bake for them. I did everything possible. I suffered in my life. First of all, I have been a girlfriend. I've been a live-in girlfriend. I've been a divorcee. I have been a victim of domestic violence. I've been a victim of financial abuse. And I continue to read the textbooks on the science of love. I wanted to know how a bright person like me could end up in all these situations. And I met the love of my life at the age of 58, and
congratulations!
I am going to say I do again after 40 years later. 40 years later, because every time I would go on a date, I would say, "Now, what would Dr. Wendy say I should do here?" Because as I was translating the literature and the scientific literature to people in language that everybody could understand, I was putting it into use myself. And the answer is this. So now that you know my history, I'm an imperfect person like everybody else. I believe that vulnerability from the get-go and honesty and authenticity is really important. On my very first coffee date with my fiance, I said, "Hey, dude, so instead of us telling each other like how totally dateable we are and what a catch we are, can we start off this coffee date by saying why we think we're completely undateable?" And he said, "Oh, okay. You go first." And so I told him actually two things that I thought were going to be big negatives about me. And then he goes, "Well, I only have one and it's huge." And he told me a very gentle, careful, sad, vulnerable, honest, filled with remorse, tears in his eyes story about having experienced incarceration for 12 months. And I welled up with empathy and compassion for the way that he told the story. He told me that my flaws weren't actually flaws, they were in my head. And we proceeded from a place of vulnerability. We started there. And that's why I really believe those 36 questions to fall in love that the New York Times printed a few years ago, and now there's an app for that, are the best thing any young couple can ever do. And maybe not the first date, but by the second or third date. It takes about 90 minutes to work through them. And in a very sequential way, it pushes you into emotional intimacy. And people report feelings of love by the end of 36 questions.
That is so beautiful. I'm going to use that one if I ever go on a date again.
Exactly. 36. Actually, it was great. I just say, instead of saying how cool we are, why don't we just say one big flaw we have that we think we're completely undateable? And he loved that I was so open and honest, and he was open and honest. And yeah, so in a couple of weeks, we'll be standing in a vineyard in front of 120 people who are flying in from 7 countries to watch us say, I do. So
that is beautiful.
There is hope, Lauren. I loved your documentary. For those who are listening, I want everybody to go to the internet right now and look up the words Lauren Southern and Empty Love. It is a well-produced, beautiful documentary that explains the system and the problems that we have in our love lives now. While it doesn't offer huge solutions, it opens up the game boards so that you can see the game that you're having to play instead of having to play in the dark. Lauren, thank you for being with me.
Thank you for having me.
It is such a pleasure to finally meet you, and keep doing the good work that you're doing. I think it's wonderful.
Absolutely. Appreciate that.
Thanks so much for listening to Mating Matters. Make sure you tune in to the Dr. Wendy Walsh Show on KFI AM 640 every Sunday. You can download the iHeartRadio app and listen to it anywhere. I'm Dr. Wendy Walsh. Thanks for listening to Mating Matters.